Is running or renting an Airbnb in Las Vegas financially viable? Or is it even legal? Today on CityCast Las Vegas, I'm talking to judge, lawyer, and my co-host extraordinaire, David Figler, about the ongoing court battles over short-term rentals in the Valley and what they mean for you. It's Monday, August 25th. I'm Sarah Lohman, and here's what Las Vegas is talking about. Okay, David, catch us up. What is the status of Airbnbs and other STRs or short-term rentals in Southern Nevada? Are they currently legal or not?
Oh, that's actually a tricky question. So short answer, yes. If you are licensed, you can run a legal short-term rental in your city, wherever you are, Henderson, Las Vegas, unincorporated Clark County. But not everyone has a license, and there's way more operating illegally or without a license than there are with a license.
That's what an illegal Airbnb means, that you need a license with your local city to be able to run them.
Correct.
So, David, I don't know if we ever talked about this, but I actually looked into it because, I bought a house here in Henderson.
Yeah.
And, this house has an attached, fully separate studio space, right? So I was like, well, this is perf for an Airbnb. So I looked into the Henderson laws. You have to pay the city of Henderson $800 to get your license, which comes with a class. Class makes sense. You don't want people to die on your property, right? On top of that $800, Henderson also takes a tax of 20% of all of your profits, as well as then, of course, you owe 20% of those profits to federal taxes as well. So it just didn't seem financially viable once I looked into the licensing.
Well, if you're running a business, there's going to be taxes and rules. That's typically true with everything, and every business license has a cost to it. There's a lot of balances out there when people want to convert their homes into, like a little mini motel for the day or 2 days or 3 days or whatever like that. They are in competition with other hotels that gather room taxes and things like that. So all that was kind of taken into account as each city decided its own rules. Interestingly enough, I think Henderson has more legal Airbnbs than any other jurisdiction. I
believe that too, because there's only one hotel in my neighborhood, but the Airbnbs are very expensive. I have so many questions about all aspects of this. But I know the last time we talked about short-term rentals on this podcast, you interviewed two very vocal advocates for Airbnb owners here in Southern Nevada. They were behind a really high-profile lawsuit against Clark County in 2023. So 2 years on, what's happened with that case?
Yeah, this was the Greater Las Vegas Short-Term Rental Association. They came on here. They were actually making the rounds of media, and we tapped in and had a very spirited conversation. In 2021, there was an Assembly Bill 363. I believe it was sponsored by then Assemblyperson Rochelle Nguyen. And basically it said that a city can't ban outright the ability to do short-term rentals. And Clark County unincorporated had sort of done that. So after that rule was passed, somewhere around June 2022, Clark County passed local rules for short-term rentals in the unincorporated area. It was basically a lottery to see who would be considered. There were also distance requirements and, like you said, taxes and fees. There are other qualifications, lots of rules. People applied, but the county was very, very slow in awarding even one license. The county said it was very difficult to implement. And so this group sued the county. They won their lawsuit in February 2023 in a district court, agreeing that a lot of the provisions were unconstitutional. They had to remove all the criminal penalties, stuff like that. And so the county held the lottery on March 29, 2023, but both sides did appeal that ruling. And so last we talked, it was up in the Nevada Supreme Court. Now, this was well over a year ago. The Nevada Supreme Court finally chimed in August of 2024. So it took a little over a year for them to make a decision. And they said that this group didn't have standing to even bring this charge. And so the lawsuit itself was dismissed. So that was the end of the lawsuit. The county started doing other stuff, and I think as we're going to talk about, they decided to sue the county federally, and that's still pending. So that's kind of the status and answer to your question.
So, like, why do you think that the county is so hesitant or, like, foot dragging about licensing for short-term rentals?
That's a really good question. And I think it has a lot to do with our county commissioners and sort of their philosophical approach to things, but also what they're hearing from their constituents. I think there's far more citizens who are like, this is an annoyance. I don't want people coming and going next door to me, et cetera. I want there to be sufficient rules versus people who are like, hey, I need a little extra flow of income in this economy, and I just want to use my house, and I should be able to use my house for whatever I want to. I mean, it's tied into a lot of things, just about the availability of housing stock, so people can buy houses versus, like corporations that buy up stuff, whatever. But I think ultimately that the county probably just didn't want to have to deal with it. Enforcement is a pain in the butt. There's only so many code enforcement agents that they have anyway, and there's plenty of stuff that they have to deal with. So why should they have to deal with yet another hard to enforce business? And I think that's why they were kind of like, we don't want to deal with it. But the other, city of Las Vegas jumped in pretty early, and they had all their rules in place well before this assembly bill in 2021. It had its bumps and twists, and then they actually put a requirement in that you have to be owner-occupied, meaning you could rent out your house, but you have to be there.
Yeah, David, I was actually going to bring that up because I know when other cities have gone through a similar battle, they've differentiated between someone buying up houses and apartments and renting those out versus like someone like me. I have a mother-in-law suite with a private entrance in an owner-occupied house.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that seemed like the reasonable compromise. A lot of people didn't agree with me. A lot of people thought it was a little arduous, or how do you even know if the person's home versus, how long can they be gone from the property? Can they go to the store? Can they take a quick trip to LA while someone's over at their house? I get the nuance is a little difficult, and the enforcement is always going to be weird. But, it is an interesting idea that we're allowed to own houses and rent them for the long haul, 30 days or longer. But it's kind of that quicker turnover, that day-by-day thing that, has everybody kind of drawing sides on whether it's a good thing or a bad thing.
And I think we can both understand how maybe a neighbor doesn't want a house next to them that's continuously occupied by people who don't live there and are invested in the community, right?
Or, that they just want to see people who work in the neighborhood be able to afford a house next door to them. They want to see community building up, and you don't have a lot of community with the tourist who comes and goes.
Right, and may not have a lot of respect for your community.
Doesn't know where the little kids walk in the morning and, is doing a little too Vegas. A lot of people, also complained about some of these houses, especially the bigger ones, being used for parties that go late into the night, and they have to call the cops. And why should they have to deal with these things? On the other hand, there's plenty of great arguments for allowing people to, utilize their property in ways that make sense for their financial situation.
Yeah, I don't love the things. I don't love who Airbnb as a company is, I will admit.
However, and they're not the only company. I mean,
we're talking Verbos, we're talking everything. But I've stayed in a ton of short-term rentals, especially as I was writing my last book, because in my writing, I tend to head to super rural areas where there aren't any hotels. So the casitas and guest houses of the world have been a lifesaver for me. Additionally, when I work long-term in other cities, now, though, with the law shift really across the country, it's become really difficult to find a long-term stay that's under a month. Do you know what I mean? Somewhere that's safe and reliable too, and also affordable. So the change in the laws have also affected how I'm approaching my work in different cities.
That's interesting. Yeah. I mean, look, people who travel, should there be more options than just being, in the expensive hotels with the resorts fees and all that stuff? I guess so. It's just, hard to put that burden on, entire neighborhoods. Like, people want to stay in my neighborhood because it's a cute little neighborhood and it's walking distance to the arts district, et cetera. Yeah. But, I'd much rather have young people who are buying their first house, or my barista living nearby,
Woven Workspaces is Las Vegas's newest premier flexible office space located in the heart of downtown Las Vegas. Featuring premium co-working spaces, private offices, and a gorgeous shared kitchen with complimentary beverages and snacks. You know, Woven just hosted our team for a work-in-person day, and I was relieved to see that they stocked La Croix because I drink at least 6 of those bad boys every day while I make this podcast. Not to mention, Woven is in the same building as Broken Yolk and Baguette Cafe, so I stopped by and got a croissant on my way upstairs. Whether you're a business owner looking for a new office space or you work remote and you just need some human connection, Woven is a workspace designed to inspire and connect. CityCast listeners get their first day of co-working for free and get access to exclusive memberships and private office offers. To get your pass and learn more, call Rebecca with Woven at 415-407-6355 and check out wovenworkspaces.com for more information. We'll get into the housing crisis more, but actually, that's a great transition. We've been touching on this, but really, why should all Las Vegans care about this issue? If someone's listening and they're not going to start renting out their spare bedroom, how are these laws affecting them?
Well, I think they should take a definite interest because it does affect affordability of housing costs. I mean, if you're in competition with a giant corporation that's going to use it for a quick flip or a short-term rental business, you're iced out. And, if you're stuck continually looking for a house and you wonder why you keep getting beat out by a corporation, it's because there is, obviously a model that works for them to use these for, short-term rentals as little motels. I think other people, depending on where they live, they may not want to see people who don't have a knowledge or respect of the neighborhood living nearby. And then again, maybe they do desire to be able to buy a house, but it only pencils out with them if they can rent one of the rooms on a short-term basis. So, look, there's rules out there. They're a little arduous. Depending on what part of town you live in, there's going to be different rules. But I think that, the government has tried its best to strike whatever the balance is between these competing interests. I personally like the owner-occupied rule. I think it makes sense because there is somebody human who you can interact with, who you could talk with, who has a vested interest, in the area. But I can understand why they don't want any rules at all, the people who are in this business. And I understand, they're funding a lawsuit to get just that. I mean, that was always their goal. That's why even though the short-term rental group won basically in the district court, they appealed too because they wanted all regulations just gone. They just want to be able to do whatever they want with their house. And, that's kind of been baked into the federal lawsuit that they're now pursuing, which will go on for months, if not longer, until we have an answer there.
And, hey, in a way, these laws and licenses have had the desired effect on me. Rather than renting out my space as an Airbnb, I have long-term tenants in there. So it's affordable housing as opposed to, a place for visitors. And I like the consistency more too, honestly.
And they could become your friends and they could become great contributing members to the community that you live in. And you could see them out at the store. And it's so nice.
David, do we know how many short-term rentals are in the Valley or with all the illegal Airbnbs, et cetera? Is that even possible to know?
Yeah, they've done some surveys based on, applications, also investigations and fines and stuff. So I don't know if they're all operating as short-term rentals, but I can tell you that just a little bit less than 1,000 short-term rental business licenses are currently active or issued, right? And then there's probably about 10,000 more that are listed in various places and operating within the Valley that are unlicensed. Ooh. But they're also running the risk that they get caught, and there's some huge fines out there. I mean, we've reported here on the podcast about fines that are in the 6-figure range.
So is there an argument to make that licensing process easier on both ends so that more of these Airbnbs are in view of the law?
I guess so. I mean, one of the sticky wikis of the regulations is that pretty much universally there are distance requirements between short-term rentals. And so,
interesting.
Yeah, so it's like always trying to figure out who is there first, how far away can you go? Is it fair to use 660 feet, which is the standard city block, or 1,000 feet, which is what some of the cities have put in there. I think the theory behind the distance requirement is you just don't want to make clusters where you could possibly change the character of the neighborhood from, truly a residential where everyone looks out for each other or, lives in harmony to being, the odd person out if you actually live there and no one else around you does.
Hey, someone could also argue, though, that someone choosing the Airbnb is someone who is more invested in our city than someone who's getting a hotel on the Strip.
Yeah, possibly that they want to experience it a little bit more and maybe there's some benefit out of there. I don't know that a philosophy will be laid down on the ability to rent out your house for short periods of time, short blasts, night by night, that everyone would accept as being a good idea. I mean, my biggest thing is the housing stock. I see way too many corporations buying up thousands of units in the valley, and that being the real
let's actually talk about that right now. That is one of the big pushbacks that Airbnb owners are saying, that at least in Vegas, short-term rentals are not the problem. It's the fact that we see corporations buying up thousands of units in the valley, and that is factual. So, do they have a point in this argument?
Yeah, I mean, I get that, but how do you solve it? So I see our federal delegation, Susie Lee and Horsford and Dina Titus, all saying, we need to stop corporations from doing this because it really is exploiting not just the housing stock, but it is not fair. These are, big guys, basically
corporate landlords. Is that? They're
basically sucking out all the air and the money, and the community is not doing well. When the state legislature has tried to put a stamp on it, the governor has rejected that with his veto power. So anytime soon to try to directly attack the corporations. Now, I've always felt, and this has been part of some of the ordinances, that you cannot list, that there should be a rule that says that you cannot list a short-term rental on Airbnb or any other possible place where people find these without there being an actual verified business license on it. And, that the platforms be held liable if they're doing it without, checking to make sure that the people who are using their platform are in fact able to do that. And yet, for whatever reason, in other cities, the government has enforced it and levied huge fines against companies like Airbnb and come to settlements. And in Las Vegas, there just doesn't seem to be the political will to go up against these big companies in such a fashion to try to ferret out the misuse of the systems. And I would imagine that has a lot to do with the fact that, Airbnb alone has tons of lobbyists who work within the state, and they don't want that. So how do you attack the corporations? How do you attack the platforms? Well, you pass laws, and there just doesn't seem to be that appetite here.
I am sort of curious because I've always imagined that the lack and the expense, our Airbnbs are expensive here as well. I've imagined this was caused by Big Hotel out there lobbying because they don't want competition. Is that part of this fight too?
Well, it's funny. Yes and no. I think initially, yes, they were absolutely part of the block, along with Culinary, who, wants dirty rooms to have to clean so that their people are employed, But I think what happened was, a lot of the resorts and casinos are also owned or operated or have some affiliation with big corporations. And some of them have been buying up houses as well.
Interesting.
Yeah. To turn into these sort of Airbnbs. And so, when it comes to capitalism, you never run out of fun things to see when you follow the money.
Oh my God, down the rabbit hole. So are there safeguards in place so that people in neighborhoods can live in harmony with short-term rentals and feel safe and feel seen?
Yeah, I think that's the class that you were talking about, Sarah, is how to do it the right way. Making sure that all of the regulations, which aren't all about just, squeezing money out of people or having these distance requirements, but some of them are about here's what you do about noise, and here's, where your parking should be, and here's what you do about garbage pickup and things of that nature. When I travel, we try to find, if we are going to do a vacation house or a short-term rental, and I always admit that I do utilize those in other places, we do our best to look and see if it's welcome in the neighborhoods where we're going. Because I think some neighborhoods actually do embrace it a lot more than other neighborhoods do. And so I think the idea is like if you were going to buy a house and your desire is to try to get some degree of short-term rental within there, I think you talk to your neighbors. I think you find out before you buy the house. But I think the main thing is that there's always a point of contact so that you don't call the police or you don't yell at people you don't know in the middle of the street.
Yeah.
But that, Sarah Lohman is renting out the casita at her house that I have the ability to call, that there's a number somewhere easily accessible where I could call Sarah Lohman and saying, hey, your tenants are being a little out of control right now. Can you do something about it? And then to have the wherewithal to be able to, in fact, do something about it.
It's interesting, David, too, that you mentioned when you're looking for short-term rentals, when you travel, you try to find a neighborhood that, like, it seems to be part of the neighborhood. People ask me for travel advice to Hawaii, and I always tell them, as opposed to staying in a hotel, stay at a short-term rental with a local and preferably find someone who is native Hawaiian, and that money is going to go right back into the community, too.
Exactly.
And so that you could be a part of that community instead of being so separate from it as well.
Yeah, that all makes sense.
So what do you think the future of short-term rentals is in our valley?
I think that you are going to see a lot more corporate buy-up, and I think that you are going to see a lot more of the casinos realizing that some of their clientele don't necessarily want to stay in the hotel, but maybe in some nicer places. What I don't think you're going to see is a change of the prohibition of having short-term rentals in HOAs. That's part of our landscape down here. And there are so many HOAs. So the burden of these, short-term rentals really falls typically on the older neighborhoods and the older houses and stuff. I think that in the future, a lot of those 10,000 are going to become licensed some way or another, or that there's going to be some accountability above and beyond just these giant fines. I don't think it's sustainable to keep letting fines rack up against unlawfully operated short-term rentals and then hitting them with hundreds of thousands of dollars and then liens on their house or whatever it is. I think there's still going to be some nuanced puttering around, and hopefully it will make sense and not lose some of the safeguards that are in place. But again, I think as we continue to have a housing crisis and affordability crisis, I think that people are going to find new short-term rentals being less in favor and more transparency being sort of the rule, not the exception.
Well, thank you very much, David.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah.
And that's all for today here on CityCast Las Vegas. Hey, if you enjoyed this show, please share it with a friend. You can also rate this show and leave us a review where you get your podcasts. And don't forget, subscribe to our morning newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Take care.